The rosemary was still warm in the air when my daughter-in-law sneered, "This tastes like garbage." As I turned from the stove, I caught my son's eyes, but he looked away. While I adjusted the sweet potatoes she always mocked, her palm struck my cheek without warning. The same cheek she once kissed, calling me Mom at our first Thanksgiving. That's when my son stood up, slow and shaking, like he finally saw the fire he'd been breathing in. He didn't defend me with words. He defended me by walking out with me. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The smell of rosemary, garlic, and fresh-baked bread filled the house as Sarah stepped back from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. Thanksgiving dinner was her time to shine, a labor of love she'd spent the better part of the day preparing. The turkey, golden and glistening, rested in the center of the table, surrounded by mashed potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, and a fresh batch of homemade stuffing. She smiled to herself, admiring the spread, each dish a reflection of years spent perfecting recipes passed down through generations. Sarah adjusted the placement of a small dish of sweet potatoes, the one Jessica always picked at but never fully appreciated. She was proud of her cooking, and this year, it was going to be perfect. She called from the kitchen, her voice warm and inviting. "Dinner's ready, everyone. Come and get it." As the family gathered around the table, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation in the air. Michael was here, but Jessica, there was always a tension between them. Jessica wasn't one to hide her opinions, especially when it came to food. But Sarah had always chalked it up to her daughter-in-law's high standards. It was just the way she was, demanding, perfectionistic. They all sat, the clink of silverware and the hum of quiet conversation filling the room, until Jessica's voice cut through the comfort like a blade. This is just trash," Jessica said, her tone flat but biting. She looked down at her plate as if the food offended her very presence. "Do you even try anymore, Sarah?" A hush fell over the table. Sarah's smile faltered, but she tried to laugh it off, just as she always did when Jessica made comments like this. "It's just a little different from what you're used to, that's all," she said, trying to keep her voice light, even though something sharp twisted inside her chest. Jessica's eyes flashed. "Different? It's like you've never cooked a decent meal in your life." "Trash, Sarah. It's all just trash." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had heard Jessica's criticisms before, but there was something about this. Something cold in the way Jessica said it that made her heart sink. The word echoed in her mind as the other family members sat in stunned silence. Michael's eyes darted between his wife and his mother, his jaw tight but his body frozen in place, too caught up in the tension to speak. "Jessica, that's enough," Michael finally muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he wasn't even sure whether he was addressing his wife or his mother. But before he could say another word, Jessica stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. In one swift, unrelenting motion, she reached out and slapped Sarah across the face. The sound of skin on skin rang out in the otherwise quiet room, leaving a stinging warmth that spread across Sarah's cheek. It wasn't just the slap that shocked her. It was the sheer violence of it. The open, public humiliation that stole the breath from her lungs. Sarah blinked, stunned. Her mind couldn't process what had just happened. Her hand instinctively went to her cheek, the heat from the slap still burning against her skin. She looked up at Jessica, who stood there with a look of disdain, her eyes dark and unrepentant. For a moment there was nothing, just silence. Michael didn't move. His eyes, wide with disbelief, flicked from Jessica to Sarah, but he did nothing. His gaze lingered on Sarah's face for a fraction too long, but there was no apology, no immediate rush to stand between them. He didn't know what to do. Emma, sitting quietly at the table, glanced back and forth between her mother and grandmother. Her face was a mask of discomfort, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve, but she said nothing. The tension hung heavy in the room like smoke from an old fire, thick and suffocating. Sarah, still dazed, could feel the hot sting of the slap fading, but the deep cut of betrayal was far from gone. Her heart hammered in her chest as she stood there, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. She wanted to shout, to yell, to make Jessica understand just how much this hurt. But the words stuck in her throat, trapped by an unexpected flood of emotions. She didn't speak. Instead, she took a shaky breath and, without a word, turned and walked toward her bedroom. The door closed behind her with a soft click, the sound final and echoing in the silence that followed. Inside, Sarah stood in front of the mirror, her hand still pressed to her cheek, as if it could somehow erase the humiliation. She stared at her reflection, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The bruised red mark on her face was nothing compared to the bruising of her spirit. Her thoughts raced, confusion and anger mingling together, yet all she could feel was the sting of abandonment. She had always known Jessica didn't like her cooking, but this was something else entirely. This was not just an insult, it was a message. A message that she, Sarah Bennett, meant nothing to her own son's family. She was the old woman, the outsider, the one whose place at the table was never truly earned. As she stood there, trying to catch her breath, Sarah made a promise to herself, a promise that this would not be the end. She would never let this moment define her. But she had no idea yet just how much it would change everything. The phone in Sarah's hand felt heavier than it ever had before. She stared at the screen for a long moment, the cursor blinking as though it too was waiting for her to make a decision. The invitation was still there. Michael's gentle reminder to come over for dinner with Jessica's family, a tradition that had felt increasingly suffocating over the years. But now, after what had happened today, there was no way she could bring herself to walk back into that house, to sit at that table, to pretend like everything was fine. Her fingers trembled as she typed the message. Michael, I won't be attending Thanksgiving dinner this year. I need some time to focus on myself. She stared at the words before pressing send, each tap of her finger feeling like a quiet defiance, a small but significant act of rebellion. Sarah had spent years accommodating Jessica, tolerating her insults and biting remarks, always telling herself that it would get better, that things would calm down. But now, after the slap, the public humiliation, she knew she had reached her limit. She couldn't keep playing the role of the dutiful mother-in-law, the one who silently absorbed every hit, every verbal barb. The phone buzzed a moment later. Michael's name flashed on the screen. She took a deep breath and swiped to answer. Mom, please don't do this. Michael's voice sounded almost pleading. It's just one dinner. She's sorry. You know how she can be. Sarah closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. The disappointment in his voice was evident, but it wasn't enough to make her change her mind. Michael, I can't. I just can't. Not after today. There was a long pause on the other end, and Sarah could almost hear his mind working, trying to find the right words. I'll talk to Jessica. She didn't mean it, Mom. I promise. His words were familiar, reassuring even, but empty. They never meant anything. Not really. Sarah had heard them before, and she was done waiting for things to change. I'm not coming, she said softly, the words almost a relief as they escaped her lips. I need to take a step back, Michael. I need time to breathe. I understand, he said quietly, but the hurt in his voice was unmistakable. Just don't shut me out, okay? Sarah felt a pang in her chest at the sadness in his tone, but it was nothing compared to the anger that still simmered within her. She had always put her family first. always tried to smooth things over, to keep the peace. But what had it brought her? A slap to the face, a harsh dismissal, and a son who had never stood up for her. No more. She had to take control of her life again. "I'm not shutting you out, Michael," she replied, her voice steadier now. "I'm just putting myself first for once." With that, she hung up the phone and set it down with a quiet finality. The weight of her decision settled in her chest, a heaviness that almost felt like a weight she had been carrying for too long. But there was something else there too, something lighter, a sense of freedom, of space to breathe and think and decide for herself. For so long she had been the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the one who made everyone else's life easier. But now, she realized, it was her turn. She left the kitchen and pulled on her coat, stepping out into the cool Nashville air. The streets were quieter now, the golden hue of evening stretching across the city as she walked toward her favorite cafe. She needed a place to clear her head, a quiet corner where she could think without the oppressive weight of family expectations. Linda was already sitting at a table near the window, her silver hair catching the last of the daylight as she sipped her tea. When she saw Sarah, she gave her a knowing smile, as though she had expected her. "Everything okay?" Linda asked softly, her gaze warm but filled with quiet concern. Sarah sank into the chair across from her, running a hand through her hair. "I canceled dinner," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm done pretending. I can't keep going back into that house, putting up with Jessica's cruelty. Not anymore." Linda nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "You've been taking care of everyone else for so long, Sarah. You've forgotten what it feels like to take care of yourself. You've earned a break." Sarah's eyes stung as Linda's words hit her like a gentle wave, soothing the raw edges of her anger and pain. She had been so busy trying to hold everything together, trying to please everyone, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. But now, as she sat in this warm cafe, the weight on her shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. "I feel guilty," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a murmur. "Like I'm abandoning Michael, like I'm not doing the right thing." Linda leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You're not abandoning him, Sarah. You're reclaiming your life. And if Michael truly loves you, he'll understand. But you have to do this for you. You've been too strong for too long. It's time to stand up for yourself." Sarah nodded slowly, feeling the truth of Linda's words settling into her bones. "It's just hard, you know? I don't want to lose him, but I can't keep living in this shadow of what they expect me to be." Linda's gaze softened. "You won't lose him, Sarah, but you have to be whole first, and that starts with taking care of yourself. You deserve it." Sarah took a deep breath, letting the quiet support of the cafe, the warmth of Linda's presence, sink into her. The weight of her decision still lingered, but there was something else there now. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. "I think you're right," she said, the words slow but steady. "It's time to put myself first." As the evening sky deepened outside, Sarah felt a new resolve beginning to take root. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she was ready to face it on her own terms. The quiet hum of the museum's air conditioning was the only sound as Sarah and Linda wandered through the exhibit hall. The walls were adorned with colorful paintings, abstract sculptures standing like sentinels at each turn. Sarah wasn't really paying attention to the art. She wasn't here for that. She had come to clear her mind, to spend some time away from the storm of her thoughts. But mostly she came because Linda had suggested it. They were standing before a series of black and white photographs when Sarah pulled out her phone, an automatic impulse to check her messages. But instead of looking at the screen for a text or an email, she found herself scrolling through Jessica's social media feed. She had unfollowed Jessica months ago, but her curiosity got the better of her, and she tapped into her daughter-in-law's profile. A post from just 2 days ago caught her eye. It was a picture of a worn family album. The edges of the pages frayed, the photos faded with age. The caption was simple: "I was never enough for them, and I probably never will be." Sarah frowned, staring at the words. She clicked on the post to read more. Jessica had poured out a long, emotional rant, something about childhood memories of being neglected, ignored, and unappreciated. She detailed her mother's harsh standards and how she could never measure up, a narrative Sarah had never heard before. There were no direct mentions of Sarah, but the implications were clear. Jessica's discontent, her sharp criticism, her bitterness. It wasn't just about Sarah. It was something older, something buried deep inside her, a wound that had never healed. "Linda," Sarah whispered, almost not believing her own eyes as she read the post again. "You need to see this." Linda stepped over, peering at the screen. She took a sharp breath. "I knew there was more to it. I didn't think it would be like this, though." Sarah's thumb hovered over the screen, reading more of Jessica's words. "Some days, I feel like I'm just pretending to be something I'm not. They never cared about me. No one ever cared about me." Her heart sank. Sarah had always known that Jessica had a tough childhood, but this was different. This was raw. This was pain that Sarah hadn't seen, hadn't understood. It struck her. Jessica's rage, her contempt for everything Sarah did, even her cooking, had nothing to do with Sarah at all. It was a projection, a reflection of something far deeper than she had ever imagined. "Do you see now?" Linda said softly, her voice full of understanding. "This isn't about you, Sarah. Jessica's anger. It's coming from a place of deep hurt. It's her own insecurities, her unresolved pain from her childhood. She's projecting all of that onto you because you're the closest person in her life. You're the safe target." Sarah's fingers trembled as she read the post again, her mind racing. The realization was like a weight lifting from her chest. Jessica's insults, her cruel remarks, the slap, none of it was personal. It was all about Jessica, her broken past, her struggle to feel accepted and loved, but knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. "I should have seen it sooner," Sarah muttered, staring at the screen. "She never let me in, never shared anything like this with me. She kept it all hidden." "You can't be the one to heal her, Sarah," Linda said, her voice firm but compassionate. "You can only take care of yourself. She has to face her own demons. You can't keep absorbing her anger and making it yours." Sarah looked up from the phone, her mind still spinning. "So, what do I do now?" Linda gave her a steady look. "You're already doing it. You've made the choice to put yourself first. But at some point, you're going to have to confront Jessica. You can't let her keep treating you like this. She needs to see the damage she's causing." The words settled over Sarah like a cool breeze, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. Confronting Jessica. It had always felt like something out of reach, something too daunting to even consider. But now, after seeing this vulnerable side of Jessica, Sarah felt a shift, a new sense of clarity. "I'll do it," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I'll confront her. But not yet. Not until the time is right." Linda gave her a small smile, the approval in her eyes soft but encouraging. "When the time is right, you'll know. You're stronger than you think, Sarah." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt like she had some control over her life again. She could feel the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. Jessica wasn't a monster. She was a woman broken by her past, acting out of her own unresolved pain. Sarah wasn't going to let that pain define her anymore. As they walked out of the museum, Sarah felt a new kind of resolve settling within her. She wasn't going to be anyone's punching bag any longer. She would make Jessica face the consequences of her behavior, but only when she was ready. And when that moment came, It was going to be the start of something new. But first, there was something she had to do. Something that would give her the strength to finally take control of her own destiny. It was time to start planning. Nashville, at this hour, felt like a different city. The busy streets, usually packed with tourists and locals, had softened. The hum of the city's nightlife had quieted to a gentle murmur in the distance, and the cool autumn air filled Sarah's lungs as she stepped out of her car. This was exactly what she needed: space. A few days away from the chaos of her family, the weight of Jessica's words, and the constant tension with Michael. She had checked into a small, charming bed and breakfast nestled in one of the quieter parts of the city, far from the bustling downtown. The house had a rustic charm, with ivy crawling along the stone walls and a porch that overlooked a small garden. It was peaceful here, far from the noise of family obligations and the ever-present undercurrent of her troubled relationship with Jessica. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt her shoulders relax, her mind slowing down. She wasn't Sarah, the long-suffering mother-in-law, the woman who spent her days cleaning up after everyone else. She was just Sarah, here to take care of herself for a change. The next morning, she wandered through the nearby park, the early morning fog still clinging to the ground. The air was crisp, the leaves crunching beneath her feet as she walked along the path. A few joggers passed by, their steady rhythm a soothing reminder of the calm that Sarah was finally allowing herself to feel. She paused at a bench, taking in the sight of the wide-open space before her, the trees, the quiet, the stillness. It felt like she was breathing for the first time in years. At a nearby cafe, Sarah ordered a hot cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching as people passed by, lost in their own worlds. She wasn't thinking about Jessica or Michael. She wasn't thinking about anything, really. She was just existing in the moment, the way she had forgotten how to. But then, just as the warmth of the coffee spread through her, her phone buzzed, dragging her back to reality. Michael's name flashed on the screen. Sarah stared at it for a moment, the weight of her decision pressing down on her once more. She had made the choice to step away, to take a break from the constant demands of family, but hearing from him made her feel guilty, as though she were abandoning him, as though she were doing something wrong by finally standing up for herself. She hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Mom, are you coming back soon?" Michael's voice sounded tired, strained. "I don't understand why you're shutting us out. It's just been one dinner." Sarah looked out the window, the world moving on outside while her world remained in limbo. "Michael, I told you, I need some time for myself. This isn't about you, or Jessica. It's about me." There was a pause on the other end, then, "You can't keep avoiding us forever. We're family, Mom." The words hit harder than she'd expected, and guilt crept in, wrapping its familiar fingers around her heart. But then Sarah closed her eyes, breathing in the fresh air through the open window. She had spent so much time holding everything together for everyone else. She needed this. She needed space to think, to heal. And Michael, even if he didn't understand, would have to accept that. "I'm not avoiding you, Michael," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "I just need time. Time to figure out who I am, without all the noise." "Okay," Michael said quietly, and she could hear the hurt in his voice. "Just don't stay away too long." "I won't," she replied softly, but there was a finality to her words. She hung up, the quiet ringing in her ears. The guilt lingered, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. She had made the right choice. She needed this moment of solitude, this time away from the family dynamics that had become so toxic. As she sipped her coffee, a sense of calm began to settle over her. The busy streets of Nashville, with their bright lights and constant buzz, seemed so far away now. Here, she was just a woman, not a mother, not a mother-in-law. She was Sarah, and that was enough. Later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Sarah sat outside at a small bistro, looking over the city that had always felt like home, but had never really been hers. She pulled out her phone again, wanting to capture the quiet beauty of the moment. The warm hues of the sunset reflected off the buildings, the golden light casting long shadows across the pavement. She snapped a picture of the view and, without thinking, posted it to social media with a simple caption, "Finding peace in the quiet moments." It was a small, unremarkable post, but to Sarah it felt like a declaration, a moment of clarity. She had been lost for so long, tangled in family drama, in Jessica's disdain, in Michael's quiet disappointment. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. Her life was hers to control, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. As she sat there, the evening air cool against her skin, Sarah realized something else, something that made her heart swell with a bittersweet joy. She didn't need anyone else to define her worth. She could stand on her own, without the approval of her son, without the validation of her daughter-in-law. She was enough. But even as she reveled in this newfound peace, the weight of what lay ahead still loomed. Jessica's insults, the slap, Michael's hurt. These things weren't going to disappear. But Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that she would face them when the time was right. And when she did, it would be on her terms. For now, though, she allowed herself this. Peace. The quiet hum of her own life. And she wasn't going to let anything take that from her. Not ever again. The soft clink of Sarah's coffee cup as it met the saucer seemed louder than usual in the quiet office. Helen, the family lawyer, sat across from her, sifting through a few papers with a professional calm that did little to mask the tension that hung between them. Sarah had always trusted Helen, had always admired her quiet efficiency and no-nonsense approach. But today, this felt different. This wasn't about routine legal matters. This was about reclaiming control over a future that had seemed, until recently, completely out of her hands. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" Helen asked, lifting her glasses to the tip of her nose as she met Sarah's gaze. "This is a big decision. If Jessica finds out, she'll likely contest it." Sarah inhaled deeply, her hands resting flat on the table. "I've thought about it long enough," she said, her voice steady. "I can't keep leaving everything to someone who treats me like I'm invisible. Or worse. She doesn't deserve a penny of it." Helen's lips pressed together in a tight line of understanding, her fingers lightly tapping the corner of a legal pad. "All right. I'll help you make sure your wishes are documented properly. No mistakes." Sarah nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over her. This wasn't just about money or assets, it was about something deeper. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity. The thought of Jessica's smug face when she realized there would be nothing left for her in Sarah's will, it gave Sarah a quiet sense of satisfaction. But she wasn't doing this out of spite. She was doing this to take control, to finally make a decision that was solely for her own peace of mind. Helen continued, her voice cool and precise. "The key here is clarity. If we leave any room for doubt, she might try to challenge the will, especially considering you're still technically her mother-in-law." Sarah's heart skipped a beat at the words mother-in-law. She'd always been that title in the background. Sarah, the mother-in-law who kept quiet, who bent over backward to keep the peace. But now, after everything, she realized how meaningless that title had become. It was time to stop living for the approval of people who would never appreciate her. It was time to make decisions that aligned with who she was, not who others wanted her to be. "I want to make sure Emma gets more," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "She deserves more. The child has always been caught in the middle of this, and maybe she needs to know that someone sees her, That someone understands. Helen nodded, making a quick note. And the charities? I want to leave something to the ones I've supported for years, Sarah said, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. Not a lot, but enough to make a difference. Enough to leave a mark. There was a pause as Helen carefully began drafting the necessary changes to Sarah's estate. She worked swiftly, her pen scratching across the paper as she laid out the new terms. Sarah watched, her chest tightening as she realized just how final everything felt. This wasn't just a will, it was a declaration. A testament to her decision to stop being a passive participant in her own life. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah's mind wandered briefly to the future, her own legacy, her own choices. She had spent so much of her life trying to avoid conflict, trying to keep everyone else happy, and in doing so, had lost sight of her own happiness. Now she had the opportunity to shape her legacy, to leave behind something that was uniquely hers, something that wasn't tied to the demands of others. When Helen finally slid the documents over to her, Sarah took a moment to breathe before picking up the pen. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. With a steady hand, she signed the papers. Each stroke of the pen felt like a reclaiming of the years she had given away. Years spent appeasing others. Years spent trying to be everything for everyone else. I've made sure everything is watertight, Helen said as she carefully placed the signed documents into a folder. If anything were to happen to you, these changes will stand. Sarah nodded. She felt powerful in a way she hadn't in a long time. For the first time, she wasn't worried about what would happen next. She wasn't worried about Jessica's anger or Michael's disappointment. She had taken control. And that, she realized, was all she needed. As she stood up to leave, a strange sense of finality settled in her chest. The next chapter of her life was ahead of her, and it wouldn't be dictated by anyone else's expectations. She had drawn a line in the sand, and no one, least of all Jessica, could cross it. But as Sarah made her way out of the office, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out without thinking, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Michael's name. Hesitating, she tapped the screen. "Mom, I need to talk to you." Michael's voice crackled through the receiver. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's been going on. About Jessica. About us." Sarah paused on the sidewalk, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had made her decisions, but the road ahead was still uncertain. She wasn't sure what was coming next, whether Michael would be able to understand, or if Jessica would lash out. But for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt ready for whatever came next. She took a deep breath, then pressed the phone to her ear. "I'm listening." It was time to start planning. Nashville, at this hour, felt like a different city. The busy streets, usually packed with tourists and locals, had softened. The hum of the city's nightlife had quieted to a gentle murmur in the distance, and the cool autumn air filled Sarah's lungs as she stepped out of her car. This was exactly what she needed. Space. A few days away from the chaos of her family, the weight of Jessica's words, and the constant tension with Michael. She had checked into a small, charming bed and breakfast nestled in one of the quieter parts of the city, far from the bustling downtown. The house had a rustic charm, with ivy crawling along the stone walls and a porch that overlooked a small garden. It was peaceful here, far from the noise of family obligations and the ever-present undercurrent of her troubled relationship with Jessica. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt her shoulders relax, her mind slowing down. She wasn't Sarah, the long-suffering mother-in-law, the woman who spent her days cleaning up after everyone else. She was just Sarah, here to take care of herself for a change. The next morning, she wandered through the nearby park, the early morning fog still clinging to the ground. The air was crisp, the leaves crunching beneath her feet as she walked along the path. A few joggers passed by, their steady rhythm a soothing reminder of the calm that Sarah was finally allowing herself to feel. She paused at a bench, taking in the sight of the wide open space before her, the trees, the quiet, the stillness. It felt like she was breathing for the first time in years. At a nearby cafe, Sarah ordered a hot cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching as people passed by, lost in their own worlds. She wasn't thinking about Jessica or Michael. She wasn't thinking about anything, really. She was just existing in the moment, the way she had forgotten how to. But then, just as the warmth of the coffee spread through her, her phone buzzed, dragging her back to reality. Michael's name flashed on the screen. Sarah stared at it for a moment, the weight of her decision pressing down on her once more. She had made the choice to step away, to take a break from the constant demands of family. But hearing from him made her feel guilty, as though she were abandoning him, as though she were doing something wrong by finally standing up for herself. She hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Mom, are you coming back soon?" Michael's voice sounded tired, strained. "I don't understand why you're shutting us out. It's just been one dinner." Sarah looked out the window, the world moving on outside while her world remained in limbo. "Michael, I told you. I need some time for myself. This isn't about you or Jessica. It's about me." There was a pause on the other end, then, "You can't keep avoiding us forever. We're family, Mom." The words hit harder than she'd expected, and guilt crept in, wrapping its familiar fingers around her heart. But then Sarah closed her eyes, breathing in the fresh air through the open window. She had spent so much time holding everything together for everyone else. She needed this. She needed space to think, to heal. And Michael, even if he didn't understand, would have to accept that. "I'm not avoiding you, Michael," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "I just need time. Time to figure out who I am, without all the noise." "Okay," Michael said quietly, and she could hear the hurt in his voice. "Just don't stay away too long." "I won't," she replied softly, but there was a finality to her words. She hung up, the quiet ringing in her ears. The guilt lingered, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. She had made the right choice. She needed this moment of solitude, this time away from the family dynamics that had become so toxic. As she sipped her coffee, a sense of calm began to settle over her. The busy streets of Nashville, with their bright lights and constant buzz, seemed so far away now. Here, she was just a woman, not a mother, not a mother-in-law. She was Sarah, and that was enough. Later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Sarah sat outside at a small bistro, looking over the city that had always felt like home, but had never really been hers. She pulled out her phone again, wanting to capture the quiet beauty of the moment. The warm hues of the sunset reflected off the buildings, the golden light casting long shadows across the pavement. She snapped a picture of the view and, without thinking, posted it to social media with a simple caption, "Finding peace in the quiet moments." It was a small, unremarkable post, but to Sarah it felt like a declaration, a moment of clarity. She had been lost for so long, tangled in family drama, in Jessica's disdain, in Michael's quiet disappointment. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. Her life was hers to control, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. As she sat there, the evening air cool against her skin, Sarah realized something else, something that made her heart swell with a bittersweet joy. She didn't need anyone else to define her worth. She could stand on her own, without the approval of her son, without the validation of her daughter-in-law. She was enough. But even as she reveled in this newfound peace, the weight of what lay ahead still loomed. Jessica's insults, the slap, Michael's hurt. These things weren't going to disappear. But Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that she would face them when the time was right. And when she did, it would be on her terms. For now, though, she allowed herself this peace, the quiet hum of her own life. And she wasn't going to let anything take that from her. Not ever again. The soft clink of Sarah's coffee cup as it met the saucer seemed louder than usual in the quiet office. Helen, the family lawyer, sat across from her, sifting through a few papers with a professional calm that did little to mask the tension that hung between them. Sarah had always trusted Helen, had always admired her quiet efficiency and no-nonsense approach. But today, this felt different. This wasn't about routine legal matters. This was about reclaiming control over a future that had seemed, until recently, completely out of her hands. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" Helen asked, lifting her glasses to the tip of her nose as she met Sarah's gaze. "This is a big decision. If Jessica finds out, she'll likely contest it." Sarah inhaled deeply, her hands resting flat on the table. "I've thought about it long enough," she said, her voice steady. "I can't keep leaving everything to someone who treats me like I'm invisible. Or worse. She doesn't deserve a penny of it." Helen's lips pressed together in a tight line of understanding, her fingers lightly tapping the corner of a legal pad. "All right. I'll help you make sure your wishes are documented properly. No mistakes." Sarah nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over her. This wasn't just about money or assets. It was about something deeper. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity. The thought of Jessica's smug face when she realized there would be nothing left for her in Sarah's will, it gave Sarah a quiet sense of satisfaction. But she wasn't doing this out of spite. She was doing this to take control, to finally make a decision that was solely for her own peace of mind. Helen continued, her voice cool and precise. "The key here is clarity. If we leave any room for doubt, she might try to challenge the will, especially considering you're still technically her mother-in-law." Sarah's heart skipped a beat at the words, mother-in-law. She'd always been that title in the background. Sarah, the mother-in-law who kept quiet, who bent over backward to keep the peace. But now, after everything, she realized how meaningless that title had become. It was time to stop living for the approval of people who would never appreciate her. It was time to make decisions that aligned with who she was, not who others wanted her to be. "I want to make sure Emma gets more," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "She deserves more. The child has always been caught in the middle of this, and maybe she needs to know that someone sees her, that someone understands." Helen nodded, making a quick note. "And the charities?" "I want to leave something to the ones I've supported for years," Sarah said, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "Not a lot, but enough to make a difference. Enough to leave a mark." There was a pause as Helen carefully began drafting the necessary changes to Sarah's estate. She worked swiftly, her pen scratching across the paper as she laid out the new terms. Sarah watched, her chest tightening as she realized just how final everything felt. This wasn't just a will. It was a declaration. A testament to her decision to stop being a passive participant in her own life. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah's mind wandered briefly to the future, her own legacy, her own choices. She had spent so much of her life trying to avoid conflict, trying to keep everyone else happy, and in doing so, had lost sight of her own happiness. Now, she had the opportunity to shape her legacy, to leave behind something that was uniquely hers, something that wasn't tied to the demands of others. When Helen finally slid the documents over to her, Sarah took a moment to breathe before picking up the pen. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. With a steady hand, she signed the papers. Each stroke of the pen felt like a reclaiming of the years she had given away. Years spent appeasing others, years spent trying to be everything for everyone else. I've made sure everything is watertight, Helen said, as she carefully placed the signed documents into a folder. If anything were to happen to you, these changes will stand. Sarah nodded. She felt powerful in a way she hadn't in a long time. For the first time, she wasn't worried about what would happen next. She wasn't worried about Jessica's anger or Michael's disappointment. She had taken control. And that, she realized, was all she needed. As she stood up to leave, a strange sense of finality settled in her chest. The next chapter of her life was ahead of her, and it wouldn't be dictated by anyone else's expectations. She had drawn a line in the sand, and no one, least of all Jessica, could cross it. But as Sarah made her way out of the office, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out without thinking, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Michael's name. Hesitating, she tapped the screen. "Mom, I need to talk to you." Michael's voice crackled through the receiver. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's been going on. About Jessica. About us." Sarah paused on the sidewalk, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had made her decisions, but the road ahead was still uncertain. She wasn't sure what was coming next, whether Michael would be able to understand or if Jessica would lash out. But for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt ready for whatever came next. She took a deep breath, then pressed the phone to her ear. "I'm listening." The sound of Sarah's fingers tapping gently against the keys was the only noise in the room, the soft rhythm almost meditative. She sat in front of her laptop, staring at the blank screen. The cursor blinked back at her, impatient, demanding something, anything. It had been too long since she had given herself the space to truly speak, to tell her story. The words had been building inside her for weeks. She'd felt the pressure mounting after the slap, the humiliations, and the years of pretending everything was fine. Now, in the quiet of the early morning, Sarah was ready to make the noise she had kept inside for so long. She was done hiding, done keeping quiet about the pain that had been shoved down for far too many years. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment longer, then began to move, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. "I've spent most of my life trying to be the perfect mother-in-law, trying to make sure everyone was comfortable, that no one was disappointed, that everyone's needs came before mine. But in doing so, I've lost myself. And I've allowed someone to treat me with less respect than I deserve." The words flowed easily now, as if they had always been there, just waiting for her to give them shape. She typed about Jessica's harsh words, the criticisms that had cut her so deeply, the times she'd been dismissed and belittled. She wrote about the slap, the one that shattered the illusion of family, the one that made her realize that she had been invisible for too long. "I am not perfect, but I am worthy of respect. I am worthy of love, and I will no longer accept anything less." When the final sentence was written, Sarah hesitated for only a moment before hitting publish. There was no going back now. The silence she had carried with her for so many years had been broken. The truth was out. As soon as the post went live, the notifications began to flood her inbox. Comments poured in, some sympathetic, some fierce, with support. The words resonated with other mothers-in-law, women who had felt the same sting of rejection, the same helplessness in their relationships with their children's spouses. Sarah had expected some reaction, but not this. Not the outpouring of voices, of stories from women who had lived through the same pain, the same silence. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Linda. "I just saw your post. You're not alone in this, Sarah. You did the right thing." Her heart swelled, her fingers trembling as she typed a quick reply. "Thank you. It feels good to finally speak my truth." But just as quickly as the support rolled in, the consequences of her decision began to follow. Her phone rang. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. Jessica. Sarah's breath caught in her chest, but she answered anyway. The fury in Jessica's voice was immediate, sharp, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. You did what? Jessica's voice was strained, venomous. How could you? How dare you air our dirty laundry to the world? You've ruined everything. The words felt like a slap, even through the phone. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she didn't back down. She wasn't going to let Jessica intimidate her anymore. The truth has to come out, Jessica, Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. I've kept quiet for far too long. I've allowed you to treat me like I don't matter, like my feelings don't count. But I won't do it anymore. You have to understand. This isn't just about me. It's about respect. And I'm done begging for it. There was a long silence on the other end. Sarah could almost hear Jessica's sharp breaths, the disbelief still hanging in the air. And then, the words that Sarah had hoped to hear, but never expected. You really think you've been the victim here? Jessica spat, her anger seeping through every word. You're pathetic. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone, but she didn't let the words sting like they once would have. Instead, she breathed in deeply, collecting her thoughts, letting the anger slide off her like water. I think I've been silent for too long, Sarah said, her voice unwavering. I think I've let you control the narrative for too long. I'm done, Jessica, and I'm not afraid of you anymore. A sudden voice cut in, a voice Sarah hadn't expected to hear. Mom. Michael's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Sarah pause. I just read your post, and I get it now. I didn't know how bad things had gotten. I didn't know how much you were hurting. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, her hand gripping the phone harder. She hadn't realized how desperately she needed to hear those words. She had waited for so long, hoping that Michael would see through the fog of Jessica's manipulation, that he would finally understand. I'm sorry, Mom, Michael continued, his voice thick with emotion. I should have seen it sooner. I should have stood up for you. Sarah closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. She had done it. She had finally made him see, finally made him understand the truth. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't over, but it was a start. A beginning of something new. Something Sarah could finally control. I'm not asking you to choose, Michael, she said softly, but I need you to know that I won't be quiet anymore. Not for anyone, not for Jessica, not for anyone. There was a pause. Then Michael's voice broke through the silence. I understand, Mom. I'll be here. I promise. As the phone call ended, Sarah sat back in her chair, the weight of the moment sinking in. The silence had ended, and with it, a new chapter was beginning. A chapter where Sarah finally found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. Not again. The cafe was bustling with life, but Sarah felt the quiet hum of the city outside as she sat at a corner table, the light filtering through the windows casting soft shadows on the worn wood. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries mingled with the distant sound of conversation, but none of it mattered. Her focus was entirely on the man sitting across from her, her son, Michael. It had been weeks since they had spoken like this, without tension, without the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. The last time they had been in the same room, everything had been different. He had been distant, defensive, unable to understand the depth of her pain. But now, Sarah could feel the shift. She could see it in his eyes, the raw sincerity there that made her believe he was finally seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. Michael stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, his fingers gripping the cup tightly. There was something in the way he moved, nervous, yet determined, that spoke volumes. It wasn't just a conversation. It was a reckoning. I'm sorry, Mom, Michael said, his voice low, almost as though he were afraid to say it too loud. He met her gaze, And for the first time in years, Sarah saw vulnerability instead of the stoic expression that had become so familiar. I should have stood up for you a long time ago. I can't even imagine how much you've been hurt, and I didn't do anything. The apology hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of miscommunication. Sarah felt a pang of emotion in her chest, but she kept her voice steady, her hands clasped tightly on the table in front of her. You didn't see it, Michael, Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. I know you didn't. I know you were caught between me and Jessica. But it's not just about what she said or what she did. It's about what I've had to swallow over the years. The things I've kept to myself, thinking it would all get better. I kept quiet because I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to be the difficult one. Her words echoed in the quiet space between them, and Sarah could feel the truth of them settling like a weight in the pit of her stomach. She had spent so many years trying to please everyone, Michael, Jessica, even herself. But now she was speaking her truth, and it felt like the heaviest burden was finally being lifted. Michael shifted in his seat, the guilt in his eyes more pronounced now. I thought it would just get better. I thought things would calm down and we could go back to normal. I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to make things worse, so I kept my distance. I didn't confront Jessica, and I should have. I didn't realize how much it was affecting you. I'm so sorry, Mom. Sarah took a deep breath, her chest tightening at the rawness of his words. She had waited so long for him to see it, to understand what she had been carrying for so long. It wasn't just about Jessica's cruelty. It was about Michael's silence, his inability to acknowledge the pain his wife had caused. The years of feeling invisible, of wondering if he even saw her at all. I've never been a perfect mother, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. But I've always tried to love you the best way I know how. And I've always been there for you. But with Jessica, I've been pushed aside. I've been treated like I don't matter. And I've let it happen. Because I thought that's what family does. They forgive. They make sacrifices. But I can't keep doing that. She paused, letting the silence stretch between them as she met his gaze, searching his face for any sign of understanding. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay, Michael. Not when I'm being treated like this. Not when you've stayed silent. Michael's expression softened, his eyes full of regret and empathy. He reached across the table, his hand resting gently over hers. I know, Mom, and I'm sorry. I should have spoken up. I should have been there for you, but I didn't want to make things worse. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the tears threaten, but she held them back. This was what she had needed to hear. This was what she had longed for. A moment where Michael truly saw her, where he understood how much pain she had been in. It wasn't just about Jessica's behavior anymore. It was about Michael's role in it, and how his inaction had made everything worse. I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between me and Jessica, Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet strength. But you need to understand something. I won't allow her to keep treating me like this. I won't stand by while she belittles me and makes me feel like I don't belong. Michael squeezed her hand gently, his face full of determination. I'll talk to her, Mom. I promise. I'll make sure she knows how much this has hurt you. I can't let this go on anymore. You deserve more than that. Sarah nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had someone on her side, someone who understood. I don't know how this is going to play out, Sarah said quietly. But at least now I know I won't be alone in it. Michael gave her a soft smile, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. You'll never be alone, Mom. Not again. As they sat together, the world outside the cafe moving on without them, Sarah felt something inside her shift. This was the moment that had changed everything, the moment where the silence finally ended and the truth had been spoken. It was only the beginning. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Sarah's living room, casting warm golden rays across the papers neatly spread on the table in front of her. She sat, the familiar hum of the city outside doing little to break her focus. Today was the day. She had spent the past few weeks working tirelessly with Helen to ensure that the changes to her will were locked in, sealed, and irrevocable. But now, as she sat with the final copies in her hands, she felt a sense of finality settle over her. The past was over. The future was hers to shape. Helen's office had been a whirlwind of legal jargon and paperwork. But today, it was just the two of them, alone with her decisions. The will had been redrawn to reflect Sarah's wishes, clear and unambiguous. Jessica, who had once been an integral part of Sarah's life, had been removed from every clause, every provision. In her place, Sarah had left more for Emma, her granddaughter, the one person in this family who hadn't treated her like a burden. The rest of the estate had been distributed to the charities Sarah had supported for years, causes she believed in with her heart and soul. The finality of it all hit Sarah like a wave. This wasn't just about money. It was about the control she had over her own life, her legacy. It was about standing up, about finally being seen, even if it took this long for her to get here. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Michael. "Mom." His voice crackled on the other end, his tone far more serious than it had been the last time they spoke. "I talked to Jessica. I told her everything. I told her how wrong she's been, how much she's hurt you. But," he paused, clearly struggling with the words, "she's not sorry. She won't apologize. She's too proud." Sarah closed her eyes, her heart sinking at the news. She had hoped for some resolution, some sign that Jessica's heart could be softened by the truth, but part of her had always known better. Jessica wasn't capable of seeing beyond herself, beyond her own bitterness. And that, Sarah realized, was something she would have to accept. "Don't worry about her," Sarah said, her voice steady but with an edge of finality. "I've made my peace with what she's capable of. You've done enough, Michael. You've given me what I needed, your support. I'm standing on my own now." There was a long silence on the other end. She could almost hear Michael thinking, the weight of her words sinking in. Finally, he spoke again, his voice soft yet firm. "I'm proud of you, Mom, and I won't let you face her alone no matter what. We're in this together." Sarah smiled to herself, her heart swelling with the understanding that, at last, Michael had chosen to be her ally. It wasn't a choice between her and Jessica anymore. It was a choice to stand up for what was right, for her. And that gave Sarah a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. As the conversation ended, Sarah set the phone down and took another deep breath, exhaling slowly as if releasing years of pent-up tension. She had taken control. Jessica's refusal to acknowledge the truth no longer mattered. The power she once held over Sarah had dissolved with each passing moment. That afternoon, Sarah attended a local community event, a gathering of like-minded people who shared her passion for the causes she supported. The room was filled with laughter, conversation, and an air of solidarity that she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Among these people, Sarah felt seen, understood, and respected, not as a mother-in-law or a family member, but as a person, a woman with her own voice, her own values. As she mingled, exchanging ideas and enjoying the sense of belonging, Sarah realized how much she had been missing out on. She had spent so many years trying to please others, keeping quiet in the face of disrespect. But now, she was free. This community, these people, had accepted her for who she was, not who they wanted her to be. And in that acceptance, Sarah found a sense of empowerment that no family member could take away. She found a quiet corner, looking out over the crowd, and for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. The weight of the past, of Jessica's treatment, of Michael's silence, had been lifted, replaced by something more freeing. Sarah could finally let go. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. As the event wrapped up, Sarah walked home with a lightness in her step, the city's energy matching the newfound energy inside her. It wasn't just about the will, the money, or even Jessica's refusal to apologize. It was about her decision to stop letting others define her. She had spent so long feeling invisible, but now she had made herself visible. Now she could walk into her future without fear, and she wasn't looking back. Not ever again. The holiday season had always been a time of mixed emotions for Sarah. Each year she tried to hold on to the traditions, family dinners, gift exchanges, the obligatory cheer that filled the air like tinsel on a tree. She had always played the part of the dutiful mother-in-law, the one who kept the family together with her warmth and her cooking. But this year, everything felt different. This year, Sarah was no longer willing to pretend. As she sat in her cozy living room, sipping a mug of hot cocoa, her eyes wandered to the neatly wrapped presents that sat on the coffee table. One of them was for Jessica, a Christmas tradition she had upheld despite the tension between them, despite Jessica's harsh words and even harsher actions. But this year, Sarah wasn't going to follow through with it. The decision had come easily, too easily. She didn't owe Jessica anything. The woman had slapped her. She had disrespected her in ways no family member should. And yet, Sarah had always found a way to forgive. This time, however, was different. This year, Sarah was choosing to focus on what truly mattered: the people, the causes, and the moments that brought her genuine peace. Instead of wrapping Jessica's gift, Sarah took a deep breath and picked up her phone. She opened the app for the local charity she had supported for years, the one dedicated to helping homeless families get back on their feet. Her fingers moved with purpose as she made the donation, a generous sum that felt far more meaningful than any gift she could have bought for Jessica. It wasn't about appeasing anyone anymore. It was about making an impact, no matter how small, on something that aligned with her values. The weight of the decision settled in her chest. But this time, it felt right. It was a step forward, away from the toxic obligations that had tied her to a family dynamic that had never truly honored her. This was about freedom. This was about self-respect. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. Michael's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment she felt a pang of hesitation. But she answered anyway. "Hey, Mom. I've been thinking a lot about Christmas." Michael's voice was tentative. The familiar warmth of his tone softened with uncertainty. "I know it's been a tough year for both of us, but I want us to spend the holidays together. I'm asking Jessica to respect your space, and I want us to heal, to make things right. Can we at least try to spend it as a family?" The invitation was sincere, but Sarah felt no rush to accept. She had spent so many years bending over backwards for the sake of family harmony, always sacrificing her own peace to keep the holidays perfect. But now, she was in control, and the thought of returning to those old patterns felt suffocating. "I appreciate that, Michael. I really do," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "But I'm going to pass this year. I've realized something about myself. I need to create my own traditions now, ones that truly reflect who I am, not who I've been trying to please." There was a pause on the other end, and Sarah could almost hear the weight of her words settling into Michael's mind. "I understand," he finally said, his voice quieter now. "I just want you to know I'm here for you. We'll always be family, Mom." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, the calm of the evening settling over her like a blanket. She wasn't angry at Michael. She wasn't even disappointed. She simply knew, deep down, that this was the right decision for her. She had spent so much of her life giving pieces of herself away, trying to meet everyone else's expectations. But now, at long last, she was giving something to herself. I know, Michael, and I'll always be here for you too. I just need to do this for me. I need to find my own peace. There was a soft sigh on the other end, but it wasn't heavy with sadness or regret. It was the kind of sigh that came from understanding, from the realization that his mother's journey was her own to take. I get it, Mom. I really do. You deserve peace. As they said their goodbyes, Sarah felt a sense of clarity that she hadn't experienced in years. For so long, she had been weighed down by the guilt of not conforming to family expectations. But now, she was free. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the cold December sky, Sarah made herself a quiet dinner. The warm glow of candlelight filled the room, and she found herself savoring each bite, not out of obligation, but because she could. This moment was hers, and no one could take that away. Later, Sarah settled into her favorite armchair, a cozy blanket draped over her shoulders, and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of Linda, the friend who had always been her anchor, and decided that the two of them would spend the evening together. They would talk, laugh, and enjoy the quiet company of a friendship that had weathered time and trials. As she sat there, feeling the weight of the holiday season lift off her shoulders, Sarah realized that this was the first Christmas in years that didn't feel like an obligation. It was a celebration, not of a family that had failed to understand her, but of her own rebirth, of her courage, and of the life she was finally choosing for herself. This Christmas, Sarah wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. Nashville had always felt like home to Sarah, but lately, the city seemed to embody a new sense of peace that she hadn't known before. The streets, once filled with chaos and noise, now felt like quiet whispers in the distance, offering a soothing backdrop to her newfound clarity. It was mid-January, and the remnants of the holiday lights still twinkled in the trees along the downtown streets, giving the city a soft glow under the winter sky. Sarah walked slowly along the sidewalk, the crisp air nipping at her cheeks as she wrapped her coat tighter around her. The weight of the past few months, the painful decisions, the silences, and the truths spoken, had all led her to this moment. She had never imagined she'd feel this free, this certain of herself. Every step she took was a testament to how far she had come from the woman who used to shrink into the background, too afraid to claim her own space. She stopped at a small park in the heart of downtown, the green benches coated with frost, the trees stripped of their leaves. The starkness of the winter scene brought an unexpected calm to her. There was something beautiful in the simplicity of it all, much like how she now saw her own life, no longer complicated by the demands and expectations of others, just her, standing alone, strong in her own truth. The transformation had been slow but undeniable. She had spent so many years walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace between Michael and Jessica, doing everything she could to make their lives easier, often at the expense of her own happiness. But the woman who stood in this park now was someone different. She was a woman who had learned that her own happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval. A soft breeze ruffled the edges of her scarf, and Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting it wash over her. She had fought hard for this peace, but now that it was here, it felt right. Her mind wandered to the conversation she'd had with Linda, her close friend, and how, through everything, Linda had never wavered in her support. It was a steady anchor in her life that had kept her from drifting too far into doubt. Sarah had started attending a support group for women like her, women who had been through difficult relationships and family dynamics. It was there, surrounded by strangers who shared their own stories of pain and perseverance, that she truly began to realize the strength she had gained. The more she heard their stories, the more she understood how universal the experience of silence and subjugation could be, and how freeing it was to finally speak up. The group met once a week in a modest community center, and each time Sarah shared, she felt the walls of her old self slowly crumble. Her story was not just hers, it was the story of so many others who had felt small, unheard, and invisible. And when she spoke, her voice no longer trembled with fear or doubt. It rang clear and steady, full of conviction. She wasn't just speaking to heal herself anymore. She was speaking for all of them. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in the group, she listened to another woman's story, and something shifted inside her. The realization was simple, but it struck her with the force of a revelation. True strength comes from within. It wasn't something that could be granted or bestowed by others. It was something that was always there, waiting to be acknowledged. She had spent too much time waiting for others to validate her, to see her worth. But now she knew that she didn't need anyone's approval. Her strength, her power, was her own to claim. After the group session, as Sarah walked to her car, a profound sense of contentment settled over her. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. She was creating a life on her own terms, a life that wasn't dictated by the expectations of others, and it felt exhilarating. The sun was beginning to set as Sarah made her way home, the soft hues of dusk painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. She felt lighter than she had in years, the weight of her past lifting with every step. She had no more unanswered questions, no more fear about what the future would hold. For the first time, Sarah knew that whatever came next, she was ready. That evening, she sat down at her kitchen table, a blank journal in front of her. She picked up her pen, her hand steady as she wrote. She didn't need to write for anyone else, not even for herself. She wrote because it felt like the next step, a way to honor her growth, to document her journey. There were no limits anymore. The words flowed easily onto the page. I am not defined by what I have lost, but by what I have gained. I am enough. I always have been. She looked out the window at the darkening sky, her reflection in the glass softened by the twilight. Sarah realized that she wasn't just preparing for the next phase of her life, she was already living it. And as she looked toward the future, she felt no hesitation, no fear. The woman she had always been was no longer there. Instead, she was a new version of herself, a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her life, and her peace. The city outside twinkled in the distance, and Sarah felt ready. Ready for whatever came next. This was only the beginning. The warmth of the morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow across Sarah's kitchen. It was the kind of quiet day she had dreamed of. No rush, no obligations, no expectations from others. The house was hers now, and she had made it a place where peace could grow. The clutter of old emotions had long since been cleared away, replaced by a sense of calm she had worked so hard to create. She stirred her tea, the soft chime of the clock ticking in the background. It was a simple moment, but one filled with the deep satisfaction of knowing that she was no longer waiting for anyone's approval. This was her life, her decision. She had created it from the ground up, brick by brick, with her own hands and heart. The phone buzzed on the table, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. It was a message from Linda, her friend, her rock. Brunch today? Let's catch up. Sarah smiled. Linda had been by her side through it all, unwavering in her support. In a way, Linda had become the sister she never had, the family that she could rely on without question. Sarah quickly typed her reply. Definitely. I'll meet you in an hour. As she set the phone down, she thought about how much had changed. She had spent so many years thinking that family was defined by blood, that the people who were supposed to love and care for you were the ones who had to be closest to you, even if they hurt you. But now Sarah realized that true family wasn't always about genetics. It was about trust, respect, and unconditional love. And in Linda, and the few new friends she had made, she had found a chosen family that was built on those foundations. The idea of a family had expanded in her mind. It wasn't just about enduring toxic relationships because of tradition or obligation. It was about choosing who she wanted to be surrounded by, people who lifted her up, who celebrated her, who allowed her to be her authentic self. Later that afternoon, Michael arrived at her door. She hadn't heard from him in weeks, but she wasn't surprised. He had been grappling with everything that had happened, with his own guilt and confusion. And now, standing on her doorstep, his eyes searching hers, Sarah knew he had come to confront the past, to seek her forgiveness. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice full of hesitation. "I've thought a lot about everything. I've had time to reflect. And I need to apologize. I should have stood by you. I should have defended you. I didn't realize how much I was letting you down." Sarah stood in the doorway, looking at him, seeing not the son she had once protected but the man he was becoming. There was sincerity in his eyes, and for a moment, she felt a pang of the motherly love that had always been there. But this time, she was not going to fall into the old pattern of just accepting apologies without addressing the deeper issue. She had come too far, learned too much, to let that happen again. "You don't need to apologize, Michael," Sarah said, her voice calm but resolute. "I've already forgiven you. I did that for my own peace, not because you asked for it. I know you were caught in the middle, but I won't keep pretending everything is fine when it isn't." He looked down, guilt washing over his face. "I never meant to hurt you, Mom. I just didn't know how to fix it." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of compassion but also of finality. "I know, Michael, but I'm done trying to fix things that don't need fixing. I've spent enough of my life doing that for everyone else. Now, I'm doing it for me." He nodded, the weight of her words settling between them. There was no more need for apologies, no more space for unresolved hurt. Sarah had already moved beyond it. As Michael left, Sarah felt a sense of closure, a quiet release. She had no more unfinished business with him, no more expectations. Their relationship had been through a storm, but it was clear now that the storm had passed. Later that week, Sarah met Linda at their favorite cafe. Over coffee, they shared stories and laughter, talking about everything and nothing at all. It was a simple pleasure, but one that felt like everything to Sarah. As they sat together, Sarah realized just how far she had come. She was no longer defined by the shadows of her past, by the people who had failed to see her worth. Her mind wandered to the future, to the endless possibilities ahead. She had a newfound sense of purpose, a sense of empowerment that no one could take from her. She wasn't waiting for life to happen anymore. She was living it. And as Linda raised her cup to toast to new beginnings, Sarah raised hers as well, her heart full of gratitude. This wasn't just the next chapter of her life. This was her story, written in her own hand, with no one else's approval but her own. "I'm proud of you," Linda said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "You've come such a long way." Sarah smiled, the weight of her journey now a source of strength. "I'm just getting started." And for the first time in her life, she knew with certainty that this was true. The future was hers to create, and she was ready to face it head-on. The sun hung low over Nashville, casting a soft golden glow over the quiet streets. It was an unseasonably warm afternoon, and Sarah found herself walking through the peaceful paths of the city's downtown park. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and fresh leaves. The world around her felt alive with energy, yet she felt a calmness that settled deep in her bones. It was as if the earth itself had aligned with her new sense of self, steady, grounded, and free. As she walked, she let her mind wander, thinking about how much had changed. The chaos that had once defined her existence, the relentless tension with Jessica, the guilt she'd carried for not living up to expectations, felt like distant memories now, no longer part of her daily life. She had fought hard for this peace, and in moments like these, it was easy to feel as if she had already won. She found a bench near the water and sat down, watching the soft ripples in the pond. For a long time, Sarah had lived for others, thinking that her worth was defined by her relationships, by the approval of those closest to her. But now, after everything, she realized that the only approval she needed was her own. The weight of her past was slipping away, and in its place was a quiet confidence she had never known before. The sun began to dip lower, casting longer shadows across the park, and Sarah's mind turned to the future. She thought of all the things she still wanted to do, dreams she had shelved away for so long. The idea of traveling alone had always been an intimidating one, but now it felt like something she could do on her own terms. She smiled to herself, imagining the freedom that would come with it. The Smoky Mountains were just a few hours away, and the thought of spending time there, alone, in the embrace of nature, felt like the perfect next step in her journey. Later that afternoon, Sarah visited one of her favorite spots in the city, a local art gallery. The bright colors and abstract shapes on the walls felt like a reflection of her own transformation, each piece capturing something raw, something real. She walked slowly through the gallery, taking in the beauty of each artwork. The creativity of others sparked something deep inside her, a reminder that there was a world of possibilities beyond what she had known. It was a new world, a world where she no longer had to shrink, no longer had to apologize for her presence. As she walked through the exhibits, she realized how much she had learned to embrace her independence, how much she had come to appreciate the woman she was becoming. She wasn't the same person who had been trapped in the role of the peacemaker, the one who had given everything to a family that never saw her value. No, she was stronger now, more confident, more sure of her place in the world. The art around her was a testament to the beauty that could come from embracing one's truth. The evening was closing in as Sarah made her way to a quiet cafe. She ordered her coffee and sat by the window, watching the bustle of the city go by. For the first time in a long while, she felt completely at peace with her life. The past, with its struggles and pain, had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She was free to choose her own path, free to build a future that was entirely hers. Back at home, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her journal. She had taken up writing again, a habit she had let fall away for too long. The words flowed onto the pages as she reflected on the journey she had taken, on the strength she had found within herself, and the life she was now choosing to live. The once impossible had become her reality. She had created a life where she didn't have to fight for approval, where peace was no longer a distant dream, but a tangible feeling in her chest. She paused for a moment, her pen hovering over the page. She could feel the weight of it all, the decisions, the battles, the moments of clarity. And with a deep breath, she wrote, "I choose peace, and I'll never go back." As she set the pen down, Sarah closed her journal, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The future was still a mystery, but for the first time, she felt ready to meet it. She had chosen this life, this freedom, and nothing would take it away from her. Sarah stepped outside onto her porch, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. The city twinkled in the distance, but it no longer felt like the center of her universe. The center was inside her, in the quiet confidence she had found. She was no longer waiting for anyone to give her permission to live her life. She was living it, fully and completely on her own terms. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt truly, deeply free. It was early evening when Sarah's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, interrupting the stillness that had become her favorite companion. She had just finished making a simple dinner for herself, something light and satisfying, and was about to settle in with a book. The number on the screen was Michael's. She had spoken to him recently, but the weight of this call felt different, heavier. With a deep breath, she swiped to answer. "Mom," Michael's voice came through, filled with the same hesitation she'd grown so familiar with in the last few months. "Jessica wants to talk. She wants to apologize. In person." Sarah's chest tightened, a familiar knot of discomfort creeping in. She leaned against the counter, eyes wandering to the window where the city lights twinkled, unaware of the emotions stirring inside her. "I know you've been hurt, and I've been thinking a lot about everything. We've both changed, and I really believe we can fix this, Mom. It's time we all try to make things right." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, taking in his words. He was sincere. She could tell that much. But something inside her hesitated. A part of her, one she had fought so hard to cultivate, knew that reconciliation couldn't be as simple as Michael wanted it to be. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She let the silence stretch for a beat, her voice soft but firm when she spoke again. "I'm glad you two are working through things, Michael. But I don't think reconciliation can happen on their terms, or even mine, if I'm honest." There was a pause on the other end, and Sarah imagined Michael's face, furrowed in confusion and frustration, but she didn't need to explain herself further. "Maybe that's true," Michael finally said, his voice quieter now, resigned. "But I still think you deserve to hear her out. It might be the closure you need." Sarah stared at her reflection in the kitchen window, watching the calm, collected woman she had become. For so long she had waited for closure, for apologies, for some validation from the people she loved. But somewhere along the way, she had learned that her peace was her own to create. She didn't need someone else's apology to move forward. Not anymore. "I appreciate you trying to make things right, Michael," she said, her voice steady now. "But I've found my peace, and it's not something I'm willing to give up for anyone." There was another pause, and Sarah could hear the hurt in Michael's voice, even as he tried to mask it. "I just want us to be a family again, Mom." A part of Sarah wanted to say yes, to let go of the barriers she had built and return to what they had once been. But the truth was, she had learned to live without that expectation. The family she had fought for wasn't one she could rebuild with the same pieces. Jessica's actions had taken too much. Sarah's heart had learned to be full in other ways, ways that didn't rely on the people who had hurt her. "I know, Michael," she said softly, "but some things, they just can't go back to how they were. I've changed, and so have you." She heard him sigh, and she knew that this conversation, like the many before it, wasn't going to offer the closure he hoped for. But it was closure for her. As they said their goodbyes, Sarah felt the weight of the call lift off her shoulders. She had done what she needed to do, both for herself and for him. She wasn't asking him to understand. She was asking him to see her. The next day, Sarah met Linda for coffee at their usual cafe. The warm buzz of conversation surrounded them, but there was something more intimate in the air today, like the calm before a storm that had long since passed. Sarah sat back, her cup of coffee cooling in front of her, and let the words spill out. "I heard from Michael last night," she began, the words coming easily now. "He said Jessica wanted to apologize." Linda nodded but didn't interrupt. She simply waited, the calm presence Sarah had come to depend on. I've thought about it all day, Linda, Sarah continued, and I've realized that I've already forgiven her. I forgave her a long time ago, but forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let her back in. Not like before. Linda's eyes softened, and she reached out to take Sarah's hand across the table. It's a beautiful thing to forgive someone, but it's also important to protect your peace. You've worked so hard for it, Sarah. Don't let anyone take it away. Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of Linda's words settle in her chest. It was a reminder she didn't need to hear, but it was one she was grateful for nonetheless. Linda had always been the voice of reason, the unwavering anchor in her life. I'm not ready for reconciliation, not yet, Sarah said, her voice full of conviction. Maybe one day, but not now. I can't let Jessica's actions or her apologies define my peace. I've worked too hard to get here. Linda squeezed her hand, her smile full of pride. You're stronger than you know. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Sarah felt a quiet sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't running away from her past. She was choosing to move forward without it. Without the need for anyone to fill in the gaps, to give her closure, or to offer apologies. She was complete. Later that evening, Sarah sat down with her journal once more, the words flowing easily. She wrote with clarity, without hesitation. I've given so much of myself to others, but now I choose to give to me. My peace is mine, and I'll protect it with everything I am. The weight of the words didn't feel heavy. It felt empowering. This was her life, her story. And she was writing it, one word at a time. And she was finally free. The day Sarah had thought would never come had finally arrived. She stood at the window of her Nashville apartment, gazing out at the skyline, her heart a mix of anticipation and calm resolve. The decision had been made. She would meet with Michael and Jessica. It was not about reconciliation, not about returning to the way things had been. It was about closure, something she had longed for, something she had to do, for herself, for her peace. The cafe where they had agreed to meet was quiet, tucked away in a corner of Nashville's bustling downtown, its walls lined with warm wooden shelves and soft lighting that made the world feel slightly suspended in time. It felt almost like a dream, a moment of stillness before the final conversation that would put everything to rest. She arrived early, as she often did, settling into a seat by the window. The coffee in front of her was untouched, steam still curling from the cup. Her nerves were steady, but the anticipation was there, lingering beneath the surface. She had prepared herself for this moment. She had no expectations, just the certainty that this was the right thing to do. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up. Michael stepped in first, his face carrying a mix of hope and regret. Behind him, Jessica hesitated at the threshold, her eyes downcast, the weight of the past between them palpable. Sarah's breath caught in her chest, but she didn't flinch. She had come too far to be swayed by the emotions of the past. They took their seats across from her. The air between them was heavy, thick with unsaid words. Michael reached for his coffee, his hands slightly trembling. Sarah noticed the way his gaze avoided hers, as if searching for the right thing to say but unsure of where to start. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. "I didn't know how bad things were. I should have stood up for you. I was too focused on keeping the peace with Jessica. I failed you." Sarah studied him for a moment, her eyes softening. She had waited for this moment. But now that it was here, the words felt almost empty. Not because they weren't sincere, but because they couldn't undo the years of silence, the years of neglect. He had apologized before, but the hurt had never truly healed. Now, though, she could feel something shifting inside her, something stronger than the pain, something that would carry her forward. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, Michael," she said, her voice calm and steady. But you did, and I've forgiven you, not because you've asked for it, but because I needed to forgive you to find peace. Michael nodded, his eyes filled with remorse. I understand. I didn't know how to fix it. Sarah turned her gaze to Jessica, who had been silent, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Jessica met her eyes, and for a moment, Sarah saw something in her, a flicker of vulnerability, a flicker of regret. I'm sorry too, Jessica said, her voice small, almost fragile. I treated you horribly, I was so angry, and I took it out on you. I never should have done that. I can't change the past, but I can promise you I'm sorry. The apology, though long awaited, felt like it had little weight to it. Sarah had heard the words before, in different variations, in different circumstances. But it was the actions that had spoken the loudest. The years of insults, the slap, the disdain. None of that could be erased by a simple apology. You're right, Jessica, Sarah said softly, her voice unwavering. You hurt me, and I've had to carry that. I've had to find my way back to myself, despite what you did. But healing doesn't come just from words. It comes from actions, from change. Jessica's face flushed with embarrassment. But she didn't look away. Sarah could see the effort it took for her to stay present, to listen. But this wasn't about Jessica anymore. This was about Sarah's own strength, her own ability to set boundaries, to know when enough was enough. I forgive you both, Sarah continued, but forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. It doesn't mean I go back to what was before. I've learned that I don't need to keep reliving the same mistakes, the same patterns. I won't allow myself to be treated like that again. There was silence, a quiet realization hanging in the air. Michael shifted in his seat. Jessica swallowed hard, but Sarah remained calm, her gaze steady. She had let go of so much, but she wasn't going to let go of the lessons she had learned, the boundaries she had set. I've spent so many years trying to fix things, trying to make everything okay, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. But the truth is, I've been enough all along. I don't need anyone's validation. I don't need to fight for love or respect. And neither do you, Michael. Neither do you, Jessica. Michael's expression softened, the weight of Sarah's words settling over him like a blanket. Jessica, too, seemed to absorb what Sarah had said, her face a mix of regret and resignation. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with a quiet, unspoken resolve. I'm not angry with you anymore, she said softly. But I've learned that my peace is sacred, and I'm not willing to compromise it anymore. Not for anyone. The room felt still, like time had momentarily paused. There was no dramatic moment, no outburst of emotions. Just three people, sitting in the aftermath of a broken family, learning to let go of what was never theirs to keep. As Sarah stood to leave, she looked at Michael and Jessica one last time. This is the last stand I'll ever make, she said, for myself. And with that, she walked out, leaving behind a past that no longer had power over her. The future, she knew, was hers to define. The sun hung low over the Cumberland River, casting a golden glow over the water that shimmered in gentle ripples. Sarah walked slowly along the river walk, the cool breeze tousling her hair, her steps steady and purposeful. The skyline of Nashville stood tall in the distance, but it wasn't the city's lights that held her attention. It was the quiet peace that had settled deep inside her, the peace she had fought so hard to find. As she walked, Sarah reflected on how far she had come. The woman who had once lived in the shadows of others' expectations was gone. In her place was someone who had learned that true strength didn't come from external validation, but from within. She had weathered the storm, navigated the betrayal, and come out stronger on the other side. The city around her buzzed with life, But for the first time, Sarah wasn't caught up in its rush. She was living for herself now, free to walk her own path. The decision to move had been an easy one. Sarah had spent weeks looking for the perfect home, a space that would reflect the woman she had become. She found it in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Nashville, a small, cozy house with a wraparound porch and a garden she could cultivate in peace. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and that was enough. The idea of starting over, of building a home that was all her own, filled her with a quiet sense of excitement. There would be no more pretending, no more hiding behind old patterns. This home would be a reflection of her new life, one where she wasn't just surviving, but truly living. Each room, each corner, would be a testament to the strength she had found in herself. As she passed the river, Sarah thought about the family she had once tried to hold together. She had spent so many years believing that family had to be defined by blood, by obligation. But now, she understood that family could be chosen, and it could be the people who truly saw her, supported her, and loved her for who she was, not what they expected her to be. Linda had been by her side throughout it all, her constant support a steady anchor in Sarah's life. And the few friends she had made over the past few months, people who had shared their own stories of struggle and strength, had become a second family to her. Sarah no longer needed to seek approval from Michael, from Jessica, or anyone else. She had found joy in her chosen family, in the people who respected her boundaries and celebrated her for the woman she had become. It was liberating, this new life she was creating for herself. And with the future wide open before her, Sarah made plans to travel, to explore new places and embrace the freedom she now had. The Smoky Mountains were at the top of her list, but there were so many other places she wanted to see. She had spent too many years tied down by the expectations of others, but now she was free to move, to breathe, to experience the world without fear of judgment or rejection. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. She had learned that not every message needed a response, not every call had to be answered. Her peace was hers to protect, and she wasn't going to let anything disrupt it. For too long, she had let the noise of others dictate her happiness, but now she had learned to tune it out. She walked back toward her apartment, the weight of the world lighter on her shoulders than it had been in years. The past was still there, but it no longer had power over her. It had shaped her, yes, but it no longer defined her. She was creating a new story, a story where she was the heroine, where she had the power to decide her fate. Later that evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, her journal open in front of her. The quiet hum of the city outside, the soft flicker of the candlelight, filled the space. She picked up her pen, the words flowing onto the page without hesitation. I survived. And I found peace. She smiled to herself as she set the pen down, the weight of those words settling over her like a warm embrace. She had built a life of peace that no one could take from her. The betrayal, the hurt, the silences. It all seemed so far away now. She had fought for this life, and now that it was hers, she would protect it with everything she had. As she closed her journal, Sarah stood up and walked to the window. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, but they no longer held any sway over her. Her world was quiet now, centered around her own peace, her own choices. The life she had once feared she couldn't create, the life she had once thought was impossible, was now her reality. While they thought I'd crumble under their betrayal, I built a life of peace that they'll never touch. And for the first time, Sarah knew that she was enough. Always had been. Always would be. The future was hers, and she was ready to face it with no hesitation, with no fear, only peace.